Well, listen, it is that time again. Listen, you know the time that we come together to empower our relationships. That time that we come together to make a difference in our relationships. You know how we say it. When we learn together, we grow together. And because we know that we're not in relationships alone. Now, I'm all about you and I having a relationship with ourselves. But the reality is that we're not just in relationship with ourselves, that we're in relationship with other people. And because we're in relationships with other people, then it only behooves you and I to not come here alone. And because we don't want to come here alone, because we don't want to do our relationships alone. And so here's where I'm asking you, listen, if you are here on this broadcast, and whether you're here on YouTube or you're here on Facebook, here's what I'm asking you to do. Listen, for those of you that are on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Make sure that you hit that bell icon so that when we go live, you get those notifications. I'm asking that if you're with us on Facebook, that listen, as much as we ask people to share this to their page, you may be watching on somebody else's page, somebody else's watch party. But I'm asking, listen, that you would not just watch there, but you would come over to LifeEmpowermentCh page. Begin to like our page. Follow us here on Facebook. And then, listen, like, share, and follow. You know that's what we always say. You know that's how we do it. And so we're not here by accidents. We're not here by accident. We're not here by happenstance. We're here intentionally because we want our relationships to grow. We want our relationships to be maximized. You want your relationships to improve. And one of the things I learned, if one in the party changes, then listen, you increase the probability for everyone in the circle to change. Because sometimes being in a relationship is like a dance. And listen, if I change my moves, you automatically have to shift and change yours according to my tempo, according to my template. And so listen, I just want to thank you so much for you being here today. This is RUFF'N IT. And as you know, I am pastor and therapist Marcus Ruffin. That's right, listen. And I'm not just a therapist online, I'm a therapist in real life. And so listen, here in the great state of California, and I'm looking forward to empowering you today. So listen, so as we are getting started, as we're moving into our sixth part today. Now, we've been talking here at RUFF'N IT, this is where we work on the things that matter most to our relationships. And because we work on those things that matter most to our relationships, it doesn't matter whether it's professional, doesn't matter if it's personal, doesn't matter if it's in your family. The reality is that the things that we share here are things that relate to all relationships. And because they relate to all relationships, these are principles that apply across the board. And so I'm just here, listen, to be able to help get you into a place, get you into a space that really moves the needle for your relationships. And so listen, so I just want to go ahead and dive into where we are going today. And so here, as I bring up here on the screen, notice here's a quote. It says, sometimes God doesn't send you into a battle to win. Sometimes God doesn't send you into a battle to win it. He sends you to end it. Now, listen, I want you to know that, listen, when we're talking about resolving conflict, when we're talking about resolving conflicts in relationships, listen, it takes two to tangle, but it also just takes one to end it. And so we're not here just looking at how do we just kind of get through it, but how do we become successful in it? And so we here also like to look at the reality that this is not just relationships that entail social aspects. It doesn't just tell the brain or the mind. Listen, it entails who you are spiritually. That's right. Listen, you are a spirit, soul, and body. And because you have all three, and we're talking about relationships, we've got to address all three. And so here, when you look here on the screen and notice now, here's our particular passage, Matthew chapter 18, looking here at verse 15. It says, if a fellow believer hurts you, go and tell him. Work it out between the two of you. If he listens, you have made a friend. Notice the next part. It says, if he won't listen, notice, it says, if he won't listen, take one or two others along so that the presence of witnesses will keep things honest and try again. You know, one of the things I have found is that sometimes when you talk about the novelty of a relationship, you talk about the newness of a relationship, sometimes we are mistaken to believe that somehow these relationships are not going to come with work. They're not going to come with conflict. They're not going to come with challenges. Any good relationship is built over time, which means that over time we're going to have to overcome challenges, sometimes heartaches, sometimes disappointments, frustrations. And so because it lays this out and tells you and I that, listen, there's going to be hurt. And as much as that may be your BFF, as your ace coon boon, as much as that may be your road dog, the reality is that there's going to be some hurt. And here what we're really working on is when that hurt shows up, do you know what to do? Let me ask you again. When the hurt shows up, do you know what to do? Because if you and I are not skillful, not just knowledgeable, but if you and I are not skillful at being able to know how to manage and navigate through that hurt and pain, I promise you, we will have a lot of relationships that are in the pathway of the road that we have been going down, and there's a lot of collateral damage. There is a lot of dead, broken, disheartened relationships in our past. And often that's because you and I do not know how to really navigate through the pain that comes with hurt, the pain that comes with conflict, the pain that comes with the challenges with any good, wholesome, wholehearted relationship. And because of that, listen, this is why I am here to be able to help us navigate it. One of the things I want to tell you that, listen, if you're watching this live versus the rebroadcast, you can submit questions right here on YouTube. You can submit questions right here on Facebook. I will see those, but they have to be on our page if you're on Facebook in order for me to see the questions that you're asking, because we like to answer those in real time, but they have to be germane to the topic at hand. And so we're on part 6 today, talking about resolving conflict here in relationship. And so one of the questions that we've asked, and I bring this up because I know that there may be people who didn't watch parts 1 through 5. And so you're tuning in today. And so I just want you to understand that we've already answered this, but it's worth repeating. And we've asked ourselves, what's conflict? And really, to make it very simple, at its most basic level, conflict is nothing more than disagreement. Now, obviously, conflict can become much more than that over time. Conflict can become these sharp interactions, and they can go from conflict to a fight. And so I'm not negating that it doesn't take on different forms. But what I am saying is that in its basic level, conflict is nothing more than just a disagreement. And so the reality here is that when we're talking about conflict and we're talking about how are we going to resolve this, how are we going to navigate through it, you have to really understand that conflict is an opportunity for growth. Conflict, listen, is an opportunity for growth. And when you and I resolve conflict in relationships, we really build structure, we really build we really build the toughness of our relationships, because now we have some durability. Now we have some trials and some tribulations. And because we have worked through those things, it brings a lot more strength to our relationship. And so as much as sometimes people like to avoid conflicts, the reality is that conflicts are really designed to work for us if we know how to work them. Let me say that again. Conflicts are designed to work for us if we know how to work them. And so therefore, conflict is nothing more than a disagreement. But then what we've been talking about here in this segment, we've been really looking at how do we manage conflict with the goal of resolving conflict. But if we don't know how to manage, and what I mean by manage is to navigate through the process from the time that the conflict arises to the point where conflict is resolved, that process of time, if you and I do not know how to navigate through that process, then I promise you, you and I do not get to a resolve. And I don't care who it is. I don't care if you are a parent and you're talking about your children. I don't care if you're a spouse and you're talking about your wife or your husband. I don't care if this is a coworker and you're talking about a supervisor to your peer, your colleague. The reality is that when you and I are having to enter into a conflict and you and I are having to navigate through the conflict, it requires knowledge and skill. This is not innate. This is not something that you and I are naturally born with knowing how to do. Because if that was the case, you and I wouldn't have any problems navigating through it. But when you think about the relationships that you've had, and you think about the challenges that you are either have gone through or the ones that you're going through, the reality is that most of the time, you and I get stuck somewhere. Whether it's in ourselves that we get stuck because of the emotionality of it all, or we get stuck because of where the other person is and we don't really understand where they are, or sometimes we just totally get all bent out of shape and we're just ready to give up. And so therefore, that's right, I think that's Elam. Listen, that's the reason why we have to manage and navigate through conflict so that we can get to a place of resolution. All right. So with that, this is why we've been talking about conflict management guidelines. Now, remember, we're on part 6 today, and so we've covered some other guidelines already. If you've missed any of those, you have to go back to our YouTube page or our Facebook page, or our YouTube channel, may I say, versus our Facebook page. All of those prior teachings are on there, but we are going to move forward today with number 6. And so number 6, listen, number 6 says this. It says that if you and I are going to have a guideline to managing conflict, number 6 says that, listen, we have to have rules to fair fighting. Now, listen, you have to have rules to fair fighting. You have to have rules. Now, here's the thing. You and I are going to get into a conflict. We've already established that. We're going to have some kind of heated discussion. Any conflict, listen, any kind of relationship that's going to go beyond just an acquaintance or associate, and it's going to really move into a significant relationship. Doesn't matter if it's a coworker, doesn't matter if it's a neighbor. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody that we come in contact with that we're going to have a significant relationship with. But the reality is that those that we do have a significant relationship with is that, listen, we've got to be able to have rules to fair fighting. And here's the thing. Here's what I find is that sometimes the rules that you have are not the rules that I have. And because we're not operating on the same type of rules, we don't know that when the other person has violated a rule because there was really no awareness about the rule, that sometimes have led into a sub-conflict. So not only do we have the conflict at hand, but we have the sub-conflict that has now entered into the major conflict. So now we got like these two whammies working against us. And so we really have to have clarity surrounding these rules to fair fighting. Now, I would tell you when it comes to men really appreciate the fact that there are rules to this. But men appreciate the fact that the rules stay the same. That it's not like, in football where, you're going to move the goalpost. It's 100 yards to the touchdown. But if you keep moving the guard post, you keep moving the touchdown, men are going to feel like this is not fair and that the rules are not set up for a win. This is set up to win for the both of you or for all of you if there's more persons involved. And so therefore, you and I have to remember that the rules have to stay the same. And it's important that we communicate these rules to the persons that are involved so that it's fair and it's clear and we understand what are the boundaries. We understand, if I use sports as an example, what's out of bounds. All of these things are quite important when you and I are talking about fighting, right, with fair rules. Because number 6 says, listen, we want to make sure that the rules are there, but they're fair because all parties understand them. And so the reality is that having rules is fair because it says, here's how we're going to hash things out. Here's the ground rules for what is going to keep this fair. Because sometimes when you haven't had personal experiences, or you haven't seen good examples of people that have been able to navigate through conflicts, you can come to the table with all kind of false beliefs or erroneous beliefs or misplaced beliefs because you're thinking that this isn't going to work anyhow. Why even go here? Because in my experience, this doesn't work. And I'm telling you, I've been there. I remember growing up as a child and I saw my parents fight. Now, when I say fight, I'm not talking about physically fighting. I know people use it in that term. I'm talking about them having verbal arguments, right? And I saw my parents fight. I saw my neighbors to my left fight. I saw my neighbors across the street to my right fight. I saw my neighbors across the street to my left fight. I could call out their names, but I'm not trying to bring anybody to the table. And the reality is, I, at some point, acquired this belief that if you were married, you had to fight. There was no way to be in a marriage and not fight. And then I came along and met my uncle and aunt, my Uncle Ben and my Aunt Gretchen. They may even be watching. And they were the first ones in my childhood experience. They came to live with us for a while. And I actually saw them work through conflict. And nobody was yelling, nobody was screaming, nobody was calling somebody out of their name. Nobody was crying. I mean, it was just a real healthy way to work through conflict. And I was amazed that this was even possible. But because I had that as an example and they lived with us for a year, I saw this happen on multiple occasions and it became a reality that this does exist. And I'm telling you, you that are watching, this is possible if you are willing to do the work that makes it work. Let me say it again. If you're willing to do the work to make it work. Now, it caught me when I was younger. So there were certain things that were kind of imparted, Now, I didn't have all that I'm sharing with you today, but I had enough that it began to just shape and mold me to where, hey, there are solutions, there are answers, there are ways to be able to have conflict, navigate through it, and you come out better. Listen, it doesn't have to be this all-out screaming match. It doesn't have to be these heaps of sadness. Listen, you don't have to walk out with bruised feelings. You can walk away, listen, not only having left this in a healthy way, but listen, you can walk away feeling heard. You can walk away feeling validated. Listen, sometimes you may even walk away being curious because it left you with the reality that there's a little more to this. And if you just kind of continue down this path, you can learn a little more about the other person. You can have some insight about the other person. You can have some real key elements to the other person if you just stick with this long enough. And so one of the things that I'm not sharing all the rules today, but here's some rules I think that can be important. Here's some basic but important ones. Here's one, listen, no name calling. Can you imagine if you and I had a rule that said, hey, we're going to have this disagreement, we're going to work through this conflict, but one of the rules is that in the midst of this, we are not going to call anybody names. Can you imagine how safe that would be? If you knew that, listen, I'm going to go into this conflict and somebody is not going to badger me, somebody's not going to shame me, somebody is not going to intentionally hurt me. Now, I may get hurt along the way, not intentionally, but it may happen, along the way. But I know that this is a safe place. And so no name calling should be one of the rules that we have. Listen, we're going to be kind. We may get upset. We may get mad. But listen, we're not going to insult anybody. Listen, we're not going to be putting you down. And when we can understand that this no name calling is a rule that we're going to live by, it's like a referee in a game. If somebody jumps out and they violate that rule, hey, stop, time out. We're not name calling. It protects the process for managing conflict. It protects the process for being able to navigate through the conflict. Because the moment you start calling people out of their name, listen, 9 times out of 10, I'm telling you, most people are going to check out. Most people are going to hey, I'm bouncing. They may stay. Some people may be emotionally able to kind of be there. If it's in a work environment, you may have to stay there. It's like your job is on the line. And so you may not really have the flexibility to physically move. But I'm just telling you, people will check out. People will bounce. People will be like, deuces, baby. And so, listen, no name calling has to be one of the rules. It has to be one of the rules. Here's another rule I just want to share with you. It would be, listen, no yelling. Just think about that. Think about you being in a scenario. Now, you may have even been in a scenario and there was yelling, there was screaming. Maybe it wasn't directed to you personally, but maybe you were just in the vicinity, you were in the environment. And what I'm saying to you is, when no yelling is a part of the rule, it keeps people engaged. It keeps people involved. It keeps people intrigued. It keeps people in the process. And so listen, you don't want to escalate the conflict. You don't want to give more variables than what's necessary. And so listen, taking sometimes a few deep breaths, sometimes calming down in the midst of it, you may actually have to say to the person, I said, hold it, just give me a moment. listen, let me just kind of calm down, relax, because I recognize I'm escalating. And the moment that I'm escalating, I'm probably going to yell, scream. And listen, by nature, by personality, I'm not a yeller, but all of us have breaking points. All of us have points where it's like you push me to the edge. And before you know it, I may be yelling in the context of who I am. And what I'm saying to you is no yelling. Listen, that has to be one of those rules. Now, let me also say this as a asterisk. There are some people, listen, that talk loud. And listen, and you and I have met them. They talk loud when they're just in a normal conversation. They talk loud when they are excited. Sometimes they even talk louder. And so they are just the type that just has a lot of volume. Now, sometimes I would tell you, you've got to be able to differentiate that in a relationship so that you can know, is this person yelling or are they just talking loud? And sometimes we haven't really encountered the person at this level. And so sometimes we don't really know maybe exactly what's happening. But the reality is that sometimes we may have to bring this to their attention and we may have to say to them, hey, you know what? It sounds like you're yelling at me. You know, and it may help them because if they're used to talking loud, 9 times out of 10, they probably don't even know at the volume at which they speak. It usually takes several different people over several different experiences before a light just begins to come on. I'm not even talking about an aha. I'm not talking about where they like get it. I'm talking about where they're like, you know what? Maybe there's something to this. Maybe I am a little loud. And so therefore, this is why I'm saying to you, no yelling has to be one of those rules. Now, like I said, I'm not trying to get into all of them, but I do have one more to share with you. And I think this is one that is quite important, right? Always and never. Now, I'm sure that, listen, I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty. My wife will tell you. I think my kids will tell you. I'm sure some of my friends can tell you. But here's the thing about this. Look, notice now. When we talk about always and never, sometimes what happens when we are in the midst of a conflict and we're trying to really put our point across, we will say things like, you always do this, or you never do this. And really the reality is that it's never to that extreme. Now, there may be a few points every now and then somewhere, but for the most part, nobody is ever, never, and always. And so this is usually speaking to the emotionality that we're feeling about what they've done. And so the disappointment, the annoyance, the frustration, the anger, that's what makes it feel like always. That's what makes it feel like never. But the reality is that this is usually never, always, and never. And so I was just looking at a comment here. All right, and so I'm not exactly sure what that comment is, Lincoln. I'm not sure if you're giving us just a comment or if there's something that you're asking, but if it's a comment that you're wanting me to, that relates to what we're saying, just kind of clarify that a little more with me. And so going back to this always and never statements, listen, this never ever gets you anywhere. Most of the time, if you use always and never, it's probably going to, once again, put the person on the fence. And when people begin to feel like they're back in a corner and they're having to defend themselves, listen, they're not going to hear you. They're not going to understand you. What they are doing is trying to basically prove that they're not the bad guy, the bad girl, they're not the bandit, they're not the villain that you have kind of made them out to be. And so it becomes this, scoreboard kind of interaction. You're trying to say, no, 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 here's all this. And they're trying to say, no, 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 here's all this. And it becomes the arguing points about whether always or never actually apply. Don't go down the rabbit trail. So it becomes one of those things that where once we have rules and we're both informed on those rules. Now, remember, it does us no good if all parties don't understand the rules. But when we understand the rules and we're all informed, it just puts us in a better space and place. And so, listen, talking about guidelines, these are guidelines to managing conflict. Now, once again, if you have a question, you can put that on the YouTube or you can put that on the Facebook page. I would see those and be able to respond to you. But if you're watching this on somebody else's page, you have to come over to LifeEmpowermentCh here on Facebook. And if somebody sent you the link through YouTube, you have to come on YouTube for me to be able to see your question. But here's another guideline to remember, we're talking about managing conflict. Managing conflict so that we can navigate our way through it to the place where we can get to a resolution. So here, when we talk about another guideline is that, listen, don't play archaeologist. Now, this is a guideline. And let me help you understand this guideline because this is important. Behaviors in the past are only discussed with current issues. Let me say that again. Behaviors in the past are only discussed with current issues. Let me tell you what sometimes happens. Sometimes what happens is that a person has done something in the past. And so now here's the disclaimer. This is important to this guideline. If the person has done something in the past and we discussed it, and I have forgiven the person for it, the only reason why I'm bringing that behavior back up from the past is that it relates to something current. I'm not bringing up the past because I'm trying to get points on my scoreboard to be able to basically say why you're bad, or once again, kind of going back to what we were saying before, this always and never. It is really a slippery slope in the wrong direction. Because sometimes when we keep bringing up the behavior from the past that we say that we've forgiven, we say that we have made amends to it, what happens is that we, the offended party, we, the hurt party, continue to relive that. And it's as if the person never, ever apologized. The person never, ever asked for forgiveness. And here's what happens. We relive the pain just as if it just happened. And we never, ever let the person go from the offense that they originally created. And this is why I'm saying that unless it relates to current behavior, we're not bringing this up for the sake of the argument. Because what often happens is that when we get into a conflict, sometimes, especially when we feel defensive, we bring out all guns, we bring out all artillery, and it becomes this you against me, and it's attack, tit for tat, tit for tat. And we begin to lose the entire focus of why we're here. We're here to resolve the one issue that we're discussing and to be able to navigate through that so that we can get to a place of resolution. But when we keep playing archaeologists and we keep bringing up behaviors from the past, it doesn't help us move forward. It's like we continue to put the car in reverse and drive backwards. And then we say, well, we don't feel like we're making any progress. We don't feel like we're moving forward. That's because we keep driving in the direction that's not moving in the direction that we want to go. And so if the behavior from the past is still occurring in the current, then we understand that we're highlighting this to show the pattern. We're highlighting this to show, okay, hey, we've been here before, but that is the only purpose for doing that. We're not trying to bring up all the feelings. We're not trying to bring up all the negativity. I know that it may feel like there's an emotional connection and it may feel like there's an attachment. The reality is that if you start dumping all of that trash from the past into the now, you're going to feel overwhelmed. You're going to feel like there's nothing working. You're going to feel like there's no solution. And you're not going to feel like you're making any kind of progress. Now, here's what I would tell you without having even discussed resolution work. We haven't gotten to that part yet. But here's what I would tell you. That if we resolved this in the past, then hopefully we had a plan to move forward. And at this point, if the plan is not working, we need to go back and look at the plan and look at what do we need to do differently with the plan instead of just hanging out and becoming too critical and only talking about the behavior with no resolution. And that can be a real tricky part, but it's a necessary component to learn so that you and I are not just so that we don't just keep digging up the past, because that doesn't help us move forward. Here's another one that I want us to end on tonight or today, whenever you're watching this. For some people, it's nighttime. For others, it's still daytime. Here's one of the things I want you and I to understand when we're talking about resolving conflict. We're talking about guidelines, right? How do we navigate? How do we manage conflict so that we're able to work through the process to get to a resolution? Here is my number 8 guideline. And here's where I say the power of I versus you statements. The power of I versus you statements. Now, let me tell you why this is so important. Usually, when we get into a conflict and it's something that really kind of, gets under our skin, you know what? Or sometimes this is just how we've learned to talk. It's not something that is so much agitating us. It's that this is the language that we've learned how to use when we're in conflict. And here it is. We'll say something like, "You're so disrespectful." And for those of you that are listening to me, you hear that, but for those of you that are watching me, you see what I'm saying. And we say it with that kind of facial expression. We say it with maybe even that kind of aggressiveness in our voice. And we say, "You're just so disrespectful. You're the one that's acting like this," or you. And we point the finger, or we just kind of give that kind of vibe off that says, you. It's almost like the always and never. This is the kind of negativity that will affect our communication. And because this negativity will affect our communication, listen, this usually when somebody hears the you statement, it puts them on defense. It moves them further and further away from any kind of reconciliation. It moves them further away from any kind of resolution. It moves them away from any kind of engagement because they feel like I've got to protect me. I've got to defend me. And I got to show you that I'm not the person that you're describing me to be. And so when the moment that you and I say you, now I would tell you, I've learned this over time. And I think that I'm probably a lot better at this than I was in times past. And so I don't really find that I get tripped up here. But I'm keenly aware of it because I recognize when I start feeling a certain way, I'm tuned in to try to figure out, why am I feeling this? Why am I thinking this? What's happening? Now, granted, sometimes I go there before I even know it. And you know what? I have just lost it. Let me just tell you, listen, I'll be honest. Say, listen, I don't mind transparency. I think that being transparent helps you. My wife and I had a discussion just probably about a week ago. And there are certain trigger words. You need to know your trigger words. Listen, sometimes you know them, sometimes you're learning them, but I'm telling you, she said a trigger word to me. Woo, Jesus. That listen, I couldn't hear anymore. I could not listen anymore. I was in all out defense mode. And let me tell you, I just had to leave the conversation. We didn't talk about it till the next day, because I recognized at that point, I'm in fight mode. And if I'm in fight mode, not like I said, not violently, I'm not talking about being physically violent. I'm talking about where this is not moving towards resolution. This is not going to be managing conflict. This is about you versus me. I'm starting to feel like you're the enemy. And now it's like, it's who's going to win. And I'm just telling you, you is one of those trigger words. And because you is one of those trigger words, it's a poor way to communicate. And so therefore, you often has this kind of aggressive tone. I mean, it's almost hard to say you in a nice way. I mean, you can try to be soft and gentle about it, but the reality is that when you say it, 9 times out of 10, somebody's going to feel this is aggressive. Now, they may not tell you that, they may not communicate that, but I'm telling you, this is what happens. Listen, I've been studying communication for years. I'm telling you, I've seen this enough to tell you, you don't want to put that landmine there in your conversation. And so listen, I statements are characteristics of assertive communication. Now, here in this time that we have been together, one of the things I talked about was communication. And I talked about the personality styles. And I said, listen, assertive communication is something that you and I have to learn how to do. It doesn't come with our personality. We may have certain wherewithals about it, but in terms of it being a real skill, that requires training, that requires time, that requires practice. And so here, being able to take the you and put in the I, listen, it's going to take the aggressiveness out, and it is going to be able to put in the assertiveness, right? And so with that, here's another thing. You statements not only gives this aggressiveness, but it also gives a judgmentalness. Listen, it makes people feel like you are not just judging them in such a way that you are being constructively critical, but it's being destructively critical. And so I statements, listen, are more descriptive. They allow you to stick to the facts and not the interpretation. And so you and I have to focus on I statements versus you statements. This is where, listen, with I statements, you begin to be able to say things concerning your feelings, your hurt, your pain, your frustrations. And it's less about the person's actions. It's more about, here's the impact that it has had on me. So as we kind of end on this note, I want to give you some examples of you statements versus I statements. Here's a few you statements. You statements such as, you are so rude. Now, how many times have we said that? Even when I just said that, it sounded very sharp and cutting and aggressive. You're so rude, right? Or we say things like, you should know better. You make me so upset. It's none of your business. Although the content of what we're saying can be all right, can be good, and have great intentions, the delivery of it is not effective. And that's what's most important. Listen, you can have good intentions, but bad execution. All right. And so I want to take those same statements and I wanted you to hear them with an I statement, right? So going back to the first one, you were so rude. In an I statement, here's what I say. I felt uncomfortable when I heard your voice being raised at me. See, totally different, right? Rude. Now, of course, I'm saying rude like this person was yelling. So the I statement is, I feel uncomfortable when I hear you raise your voice at me. Another example, you should know better. Here's the I statement. I thought that you had known that. See, totally different tone, totally different delivery, totally different experience. A third one, notice, you make me so upset. Examples of an I statement. I was upset when I heard those words. You can even give the words that you heard. But it takes the aggressiveness out and it puts the assertiveness in, and it gives a place for dialogue. It gives a place for empathy. It gives a place of connection. Here's another example. Notice now, it's none of your business. An example of that in I statement, I don't feel comfortable discussing personal issues. I don't feel comfortable discussing personal issues. So when you and I find ourselves at a place where we're wanting to say you may have to take a breather, step back, and be able to say, how can I say this in a way that really communicates non-aggressiveness, non-threatening behavior, non-judgmental behavior, but it brings you into the conversation, it engages you, and it allows you to really hear what I'm trying to say, instead of you being put off or you feeling like you've got to defend because you've been attacked. And so this is why when we're talking about these guidelines to navigating conflict, managing conflict, these are the guidelines that help you and I get to a place of where we can move to a resolution because we're protecting the process that's helping you and I to get to that space and place. And so listen, I hope that this has been really helpful to you. I hope that this has really been a blessing to you. I hope that you have found that there is something worthwhile out of these guidelines that we've been given today. And because we have been given these guidelines, it has really become the kind of thing that, that puts us in a place and space that allows us to really be able to navigate through the process. Now listen, here's what I always say at the end. I pray that this has really been helpful. I pray that this has really served you well today, that this has been a real investment in your relationship. But here's what I also ask, that you would partner with us here at RUFF'N IT. And you say, how can you partner? I'm asking that you would partner in a financial way. And so listen, this is brought to you by Life Empowerment. Because this is brought to you by Life Empowerment, here's how you can give through Life Empowerment. And so here you see on the screen that there are these different ways in which you can give. And so you can do it through the Cash App. That's LifeEmpowermentCh. You can do it through PayPal at lec@let-god.org. You can also do that here because some people like to mail checks or do money orders. You can also do that through the mail. Here's our P.O. Box, Life Empowerment Church, P.O. Box 7958, Moreno Valley, California, 92552. And so whether you are mailing that in to us, whether you are sending it through PayPal, whether you are doing it through Cash App, here, listen, we thank you for partnering with RUFF'N IT so that we can continue to do the work that we do. And we thank you so much that you continue to believe given us, and the investment that you receive is worth the investment that you put back into this space and place. And so listen, so we want to thank you again for being here for Roughing It. Listen, we're going to continue this. Listen, next week, I'm going to show you how do we work through a conflict to a resolution? Because we've talked about quite a few pieces to the process, but how do we kind of bring all this to a place that where we have a problem, we work through the problem, and now we can get to a resolution. Listen, I want to show you that next week. And so I thank you for joining us again here next Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for Roughing It. And I thank you for not only you coming, but bringing somebody with you, especially somebody that you're in relationship with, because when we learn together, we grow together. And so listen, this is therapist and Pastor Marcus Ruffin. I thank you for being here with us, and I look forward to seeing you again on next week. All right, God bless you, and you be empowered in your relationships.